Good afternoon, PVF Roundtable members, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Ruth Mitchell. I'm the editor of the Wholesaler magazine, the official publication of the PVF Roundtable. Now, as a member, you understand that there's strength in community and there's strength in numbers, which is why you are part of such a robust organization. The Roundtable provides members with many opportunities to network and connect with their industry peers, to discuss your challenges, find solutions. We celebrate your successes. We keep a pulse on what's happening now in the industry, as well as what's going to take place down the line. How's the health of the channel and where are we headed? Which is exactly why you are joining me here today. Today, we're here to discuss the state of the PVF industry. Joining me is Dr. Don McNeeley, chairman of the board of Chicago Tube and Iron, a distributor and fabricator with engineering services founded in 1914 on Chicago's South Side. The company has posted 105 years of consecutive profitability, which has provided the capital for continued growth and job creation. Together, along with Olympic Steel, they have 34 locations throughout the United States and Mexico, with 4.2 million square feet of processing facilities. Now, Dr. Don McNeeley is a well-known industry professional as well as industry speaker. He's a featured columnist in the Wholesaler magazine with his column titled The McNeeley View. With a doctoral degree in economics, an MBA, a master's degree in management and organizational behavior, as well as a Bachelor of Science degree in business, he is also a professor at Northwestern University's McCormick School of Engineering. I think he's well-versed to talk about what's happening within PVF now and the state of the PVF industry overall. I'm excited to jump right in, so let's just get started. Don, thank you for joining me here today.
Well, thank you, Ruth, and I want to thank you for putting together this webinar. Clearly, you have a robust agenda. And I also want to thank you for making the agenda content-rich. The last thing any of your listeners need, or any of us need, is yet another COVID Zoom experience. You know, we all got it. Wash our hands, cover our face, socially distance. We got it. We need to bump the needle and move on. Also, Ruth, thank you for a heads up on their subject matter. As a result of that heads up, I've been able to put some data-rich slides together with you for your membership. And there's so much content today. The other purpose served with those slides is the average American listens at a rate of 425 words per minute. The average speaker delivers at 150 words a minute. So there's a tendency of people getting ahead of you and losing attentiveness. So given those two facts and the content today, I'm going to deliver at a faster pace so we can get through all your subject matter. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you, Don. I greatly appreciate that. And I know we discussed, you're right, your slides are content rich, and there's a lot that folks I know are going to want to go back and look at, and we'll be able to provide those to our viewers at the end of this presentation. You know, I don't think there's a better place to start than let's talk about, you know, the big question, the economy. What's happening? What's taking place? You know, Don, give me your viewpoint on what you see from where you're seated.
Well, your timing couldn't be better. The subject is absolutely spot on for today's conversation. You know, contrary to what we hear in the media each and every day and the warnings that our nation is down for the count, that just isn't the case. The data doesn't support that. You know, we have the most powerful, influential economy in the entire world. In the classroom, we teach the differences between correlation and causation. And it's important that we in our industry follow the macroeconomic trends. And if you ask why, the answer is because our industry is significantly correlated to what's happening with the GDP. And if you look at, I want to share some slides with you here, if I may. So let's dive right in. So first of all, if you look at that number on the screen, that's $21 trillion, $21.4 trillion. Now, we start to throw millions and billions and trillions around as if they're interchangeable, and they certainly aren't, and they're not even a linear scale. So think for a minute, $1 trillion is 1,000 billions. 1,000 billions, or another way of telling you what a trillion is a million millions. So it is significant. Now, just to kind of frame that perspective, because we're going to be talking about big numbers today, you know, a million seconds ago was 11 and a half days ago, but a billion seconds was 32 years ago. Think of the difference between 11 and a half days versus 32 years. But by the way, a trillion seconds ago was 32,000 years ago. So our politicians like to throw millions of billions of trillions around as if it's monopoly money, but it's real money. Let me acknowledge that China is a legitimate threat. They're often in the news when we discuss the economy. But remember, China is a communist regime, but they are not going to pass us by. They simply are not. For perspective, if you look at GDP, the United States is sitting at that aforementioned 21.4 trillion. That is the power. That's where the world power is. China is still significantly below us at the number 2 economy, 14.3 trillion, followed by Japan, Germany, and India. Look at India, the 5th largest economy in the entire world. And here the USA is 7 times bigger than the 5th economy. By the way, the next 5 beyond this would be, I guess, United Kingdom, France, Brazil, and then China. By the way, there are thousands of economies in the world. There's traditional economic systems, there's command economic systems, there's market economic systems, and then the 4th one is some hybrid of those 3. Having said all that, here we are with with Canada being in 10th place, the 10th largest economy in the world, and we are 10 times that 10th largest economy with thousands following. So if you look for a moment at that 21.4, note the power of that numerator. So when people say, Ruth, as I've heard you speak in your columns, when you look at GDP growth of an anemic 3%, everybody says it needs to grow more than 3. Understand that 3% of $21 trillion is significant. So if you look at Q1 of this year, that $21.4 trillion economy grew at 3.2%. In 2021, our entire year, it's projected at 4.5%. Goldman Sachs is saying it's going to grow at 6.8%, and we're going to continue to grow near 4% for 2022. Now, the other thing you want to look at our economy in terms of our business forecasting ability, what's happening in the world. And if you look at 2021, this year on a world GDP growth, they too are going to grow at 5.5%, followed by even stronger growth than ours in 2022. Now, keep in mind their GDP is not as big as ours, but the takeaway for your listeners is you want not only our economy to be good, you want the world economy to be good. Because if the world's in recession, let me ask you, in this political environment, where are they going to be dumping their products? Right here at home. The other thing that's very much part of the economic discussion is the COVID bailout. You know, today we have formally said we've given $4.1 trillion worth of support. And if you look at some of the peripheral programs, it's really over $5 trillion. And currently, under the name of the American Rescue Plan of 2021, there's $1.9 trillion of additional stimulus. So let me tell you, there is some good in that. And even we as PVFers think it's good. $473 billion of that is going to individuals, many who need help. Not all, but many who need help. So you've got $75 billion going to vaccines. Who's going to fight that? $26 billion going to restaurants. As devastated as industries have been, the pipe, valve, and fitting industry was deemed essential. Restaurants were not. So I have no problem with that help. Airlines were shut down overnight. So $15 billion is going to support airlines payroll. And then $7.2 billion to the payroll protection plan. That total is about $600 billion. So what's the bad? Think of that $600 billion in light of a $1.9 trillion stimulus package. So if $0.6 trillion is going to all that good, where's the other $1.3 trillion going to? And I suggest to you that it's just laden with pork, because everybody jumped on the bandwagon to put a bridge in their home district. So if you look for a moment, it's porkish. Some of these may be worthy, but in fact dubious. $200 million is going to the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Not really sure what that has to do with COVID. Over $250 million going to the National Endowment of the Arts. $128 billion going to K through 12 funding. And then many states, municipalities just simply mismanage their defined benefit plans. You know, Ruth, you're headquartered in Illinois. We are $141 billion underfunded. if people continue to bail us out, then where is this compelling notion to look at pension reform? But $86 billion is going to support people that have mismanaged their pensions. Now, if you look at that National Endowment of the Arts, one of the things that frustrated me is many years ago, an artist by the name of Andre Serrano actually urinated in a mason jar, put a crucifix in there, and that was his art. That was his art. And by the way, he himself was a Catholic. And I think art's in the eye of the beholder. And there is some awful good art. I think art is an extension of your First Amendment rights. But maybe too much of a good thing is no longer a good thing. I contend that this particular feature might not be a good thing. I don't want my tax dollars supporting things like that under the dubious label of art. But I don't mean to in any way mitigate that there's good art out there. I don't understand why the subsidy has to occur through a COVID funding bill. Those are some of my thoughts.
Thank you, Don, for those numbers. I mean, the figures that you just presented are staggering. And I know that we just came through with another COVID relief that was approved over the weekend here. Talk to me about how this impacts the PVF industry. I mean, there's implications here all across the board. What are we seeing from the numbers that you had presented to the economic forecast of where are we headed?
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's all about us. I mean, it's okay to pursue our own selfish interests. We're creating jobs and doing some good things, but because we are so correlated, Ruth, with the GDP, the overall economy, it was important to lay that foundation. So what are the takeaways for us? I want to give a shout out to your publications, Ruth, and specifically an author by the name of Brian Ford and Steve Letko. I think those two columnists for your magazine do a great job of keeping us informed in the industrial PVF area. If you go back and you look at 2019, oh my God, what a great year for all of us in PVF. And then kind of what happened on the way to the bank, all these other anemic numbers. But step back for a minute, that $13 billion PVF spending in 2019, that in itself was addressing some pent-up demand. That in itself was a 12-year high. So really, I don't think we should look at 20 through 24 as some type of overreaching correction. I think it's more right-sized. I think it's more normal. But if you look out, we're going to see a few good years here with $11 to $12 billion worth of spend in industrial PV&F. For example, in 2021 alone, there's $90 billion of capital projects on the books that require PV&F supply. Only $9 billion of that is listed as having low probability of approval. So your takeaway is $80 billion are listed at a 70 to 100% probability of occurring. Now, if you look for a moment at the CPI, this is a very dubious number. Do we really have inflation at only 2.3%? I think once again, for political agendas, we cook the books or we invoke a delay. Has anybody looked at buying lumber lately or steel or electrical or labor? By the way, gasoline alone is up $1 a gallon from the last day that President Trump was in office. If you look for a moment, the CRU is at $1,240 a ton. So let's go to a third-party objective source that doesn't have a bias. And the U.S. Chamber of Commerce releases an industrial report quarterly. And right now, the most recent quarter, Q1, 83% of industrial companies responding are experiencing product delays. 70% are struggling to meet schedules, 68% experiencing delays, and so forth and so on. Go to the last data point. 39% of those surveyed, so within a stone's throw, half of them are turning down work opportunities. So there's projects and business out there. So not only are current conditions good, but frankly, the queue is full. So more projects are coming. I just don't want to beat a dead horse here, but if you look at construction, and a lot of your members are in residential and commercial construction, look at yellow pine. So start to think of plywood and 2x4. You really measure that when you quote it in per 1,000 board feet. Right now, 1,000 board feet of yellow pine costs you $1,012. The year prior, it was $350. To the average $400,000 home, it's added almost $30 in cost. I mean, next time you're in Home Depot, walk by the lumber aisle. A 2x4x8 foot is going for as much as $8, and one sheet of 4x8 plywood, $55. Plumbing fixtures are at a 16-week lead time. Frankly, that's all boding well for our future and what's in the queue. Finally, I'll just share with you, now that they've approved the $1.9 trillion stimulus package that you alluded to, Ruth, the next thing on the docket is our infrastructure is imploding nationwide. We continue to delay it. This is the year that is going to be realized. Next up is a $2 trillion infrastructure bill, which certainly is going to bode well for our members.
Well, you hit it right there, Don, when you're showing such staggering numbers like this for the infrastructure bill. And I automatically go to the energy sector and, what's happening within the energy sector, especially with COVID hopefully behind us, but the implications that had on the energy sector as well as the Keystone Pipeline. Can we talk about that?
Absolutely. And I'll speak to the COVID getting behind us pretty quickly. It's starting to kick it into high gear where we have herd immunity, if you will. Nobody is happier with energy right now than OPEC and Russia. They're very excited. The USA right now is doing things like canceling pipelines. We're talking about banning fracking. Our energy independence for the rest of the world is about to be surrendered. OPEC and Russia have certainly curtailed production to mitigate the delta between supply and demand. As a result, you now see energy prices going up near $70 a barrel. I want to give a perspective that too many people miss. 9.8 million Americans work in the oil and natural gas sector. That's 5.6% of all employment. The industry that's parallel and reliant on oil and natural gas is the chemical industry. They employ another 3.5 million, or another 3.5% of the workforce. Bottom line, 1 out of every 10 jobs in the United States of America is related to energy. That doesn't even consider the ripple effect of the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, the waitress at the local restaurant. It has profound implications. So to put the energy sector in your sights for a death shot is really ill-conceived. Right now you talk about fossil fuels and renewables. Think fossil, oil, gas, and coal. Coal's pretty much all but dead. We're hanging on with oil and gas. Renewables are wind, sun, and geothermal. Very exciting in this environmentally sensitive environment. And I'm not suggesting we shouldn't be environmentally sensitive. But still, to this day, 83.4% of all the power in our entire country comes from oil and gas. Only 16.6% comes from renewable. So when you see that headline there, that by 2035, we will be 100% renewable, it's a bit ridiculous. It makes good headlines, Ruth, but it relies on technology not yet developed. Not yet even developed. So there's some very profound assumptions in there. I was having a debate with my buddy a couple of years ago, and I was trying to get him to quit smoking. And it kind of reminds me of this scenario here. He said, well, I figure by the time I catch lung cancer, they'll have a cure. Well, what if you're wrong? So it's nice to start killing and pulling the rug out from under the fossil fuel sector. But the reality is, if you don't have technology that can forward that renewable sector, you're going to have problems. The last thing I wanted to address is your question on the Keystone Pipeline. Oh, my God. So a little bit of an education. A lot of people are not aware. The Keystone Pipeline began in 2008. 2008. There's 4 phases. Phase 1, 2, and 3 are all complete. All of them are down. Now, this exists because there's some very heavy tar, heavy crude oil that is in abundance up in Alberta. We need to transmit that crude oil down to the central United States because that's where we have the refining capacity available. So what had happened in this process is they just dealt the death blow to phase 4, or the final stage. It cost us 11,000 jobs, $2.2 billion in payroll, and again, that ripple effect that I spoke to earlier. Phase 4 is 1,200 miles of pipe, valve, and fittings. So if you recall, it ran from 2008 to 2015 until the Obama administration stopped. And then Trump reversed that in 2017, and we began phase 4. And then Biden reversed it again in 2021. So it's become a political football where each iteration of political control has to remove everything done by their predecessor, whether it's good or bad. So now how do we get that crude down to the United States? You know, the only other way to bring it is to bring it by rail. It is more environmentally dangerous to transmit it by rail due to derailments and contamination. It's more vulnerable to terrorism, and I think we need to always have that on our agenda. And at the bottom line, look at it from an economic standpoint. I guess I close with saying to ship it by rail, 2 to 3 times the cost. So what's going to happen to heat your house and fill your gas tank?
Well, thank you for sharing that, Don. I mean, that is Keystone Pipeline is on everybody's mind, front and center. You've given me some good numbers here, though, in terms of where we're headed, the PVF side. It looks like we're doing an uptick, but I'm sure that there's got to be some threats that are still coming down the line here. You want to talk about that? Yeah,
let me transition to that because I think that's going to be pretty important. So earlier I spoke with great pride of being an American in the world's strongest economy at $21.4 trillion. The problem is with all this COVID support and the irresponsibility of our government, U.S. debt's at $28 trillion. U.S. debt right now is at 130% of GDP, and that's very dangerous. You know, we had Janet Yellen as the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, now Jerome Powell. It's interesting how they play to whoever the incumbent administration is. During the Trump administration, deficits are bad, we've got to be careful, and I agree with that. And now, if we own the printing presses, deficits really don't matter. Think for a moment. Unemployment rates in 2020. If you go back a year ago, we were just humming Q1, Q2. At the end of Q2, enter this pandemic. All of a sudden, that's a significant jump from 3.5 to 4.5 in 1 month, if you will. And then April, the pandemic was just going wildfire. Unemployment jumped to 14.7%. solely because of COVID. Now, let me lock in on that 14.7 for a moment and what's happened since then. Look what's happened to the unemployment rate every month since. We are down to a 5.9% unemployment. By the way, there's frictional unemployment and there's structural unemployment. Right now, we deem 4% unemployment to be full employment utilization. So I think the takeaway here in terms of threats, is the stimulus really productive or is it destructive? Is it working against us? Is our very own tax dollars in the PVF community working against us? Let me see if I can give you a compelling case. So I asked my PVF brother, is anybody having problems hiring or just me? Now, I get out throughout our industry and we all have jobs open right now. So think for a minute. Let's take an example of a family of 4 where the 2 kids are over age 6. You know, they've got 4 payments of $1,400 for each person in that household. That's $5,600. And then there's the 2 additional payments of $3,000 each for the adults, $6,000. So that's $11,600 tax-free. Now with the new stimulus, we're looking at $400 per person each week. That's another $38,400. So I don't want to get redundant on the numbers here, but if I add that $38,400 to the $11,600, you've got an income of $50,000 after tax just from the federal government for not working. Now, add to that state unemployment, and all the states of our listeners differ a little bit, but let me take kind of the middle of the road. Assume state unemployment is $300 a week times those 2 adults. Now add that to the $50,000, you're at $82,000 a year tax-free. So economists vote in the gross up of what the gross income would be to net $82,000. And the estimation, if benefits were maxed, it's equivalent to a $135,000 a year job. If you look at the PVF jobs paying $70,000 a year, how do we compete? We can't compete with the government stimulus, which is being funded with our own dollars. So therein lies the problem. The last threat that we need to mention, because it potentially will cripple the environment, is we all hear about student loan debt. Now, if you're going to pay attention to any slide today, this is the one. $1.7 trillion in student loan debt. 70%, and you know, Ruth, again, the other half of my life is in the academic environment. 70%, 7 out of every 10 students graduates with some student debt. The average debt of those 70% of students is $30,000. There are 44 million Americans with student loan debt today. Now think there's only 333 million people in our nation, right? You know, 100 million of them got to be kids that aren't even college age yet. I mean, 44 million people with some student debt, not debt, just student loan debt. Student loan debt a year ago was 35% non-performing, where they weren't even getting $1 of repayment. By the way, because everybody's talking about waiving, it's 100% non-performing, rounds to 100. Who would send in a check today when the administration said we're going to let it go away? By the way, here's the sobering statistic of what you're getting for that student loan debt burden. Only 33% of all college students graduate in 4 years. Only 53% graduate in 6 years. How many graduate over 6 years? You got to go to the right of the decimal. So the takeaway there is 48% of people going to college never, ever finish college, yet they go through life with a student loan debt. And now we're talking about students having their loan forgiven. Now, normally, if you get a loan forgiven, you have to pay tax on it because it's income. They're not only talking about waiving the loan, Ruth, they're talking about waiving the tax obligation. So think of the people that did repay their student loans. The husband and wife, they had student debt, so they don't go out to dinner as often, or they delayed buying that next house, or they drive a beater car as a new car. I mean, what do we do to those people? Don't we have an obligation to make them whole? Because if not, in effect, we've just discriminated against our nation's most responsible. So these are some of the threats that I think are the minefield that we need to be aware of.
Thank you for that perspective, Dawn. And I'm going to circle back to this conversation in just a minute in regards to student debt. I do want to talk to you about talent and showcasing the industry. But before we get there, you know, we would be remiss if we didn't talk politics right now. And specifically, there's been a big change within the U.S. We had, you know, the changing of presidents and the changing of viewpoints here. I'd like to address about how that impacts the PVF industry, and also if we can touch on tariffs too, because that's going to come up when we're talking about the political arena here.
Yeah. So if you want to know where the current landscape is with any advanced society, you start to look at what's the most divisive subject in that society at that time. You know, once upon a time, it might have been the wars between the Catholics and the Protestants, and then the Christians and the Jews, or the Jews and the Muslims, or the Muslims and the Buddhists. You have all these wars. Today, many feel it's gender. It seems like every discussion leads with gender or this social injustice that's now front and center and should be. But in effect, the single most divisive issue in our society today is political divisiveness. We are divided clearly along political lines. All the votes are all along political lines. And one administration after another is hell-bent to undo the prior administration's everything. And that applies to both Republicans and Democrats, because as soon as the Republicans took control, they went after Obama's agenda. As soon as Biden took over, he's going after Trump's agenda. The 232s were front and center, and one of the first things that the Trump administration did to help our industry compete against subsidized foreign entities. And I'm telling you, because that was front and center in the Trump administration, this administration, again, is hell-bent to eliminate that. So at best, you're going to see the thresholds and the tariffs significantly reduced. My prediction is you're going to see them eliminated. Now, those of us that don't like the elimination of those tariffs, because it's going to allow subsidized Chinese steel to enter our nation, right now, we are helping this administration pave the way to the elimination, given the hyperinflationary price increases of our steel. And not only is steel right now, as I said, over $1,000 a ton, that's not the real issue. The real issue is we're getting put on allocation, where you can only buy 60 to 70% of what you purchased the year before. So right now, if you don't bring more capacity online domestically, or you don't allow foreign steel to come in, you're going to put the American manufacturing community on its knees. We've got to remember, China is a communist country. They are a big threat. We are losing our skill set to manufacture and produce in engineering. You know, central to anything mechanical is a ball bearing. I don't believe you can have a ball bearing manufactured in America anymore. Some may call it conspiracy, but I suggest to you that China may have a master plan. If I could stick with you with just one more big threat that's bothering me, it's this denunciation of capitalism. Somehow it's public enemy number one, and we've got a progressive agenda looking to supplant the capitalistic for-profit environment. So at the university, and Ruth, you're going to be with me this fall, you'll see it firsthand. Students do a case study, and one of the case studies we had was Amazon. And normally you can market cap a company that's a new startup in the tech field by not EPS, earnings per share, but revenue per share. And the revenue per share is the new metric because there's no earnings. And so people look for you to gather market share and then monetize it about year 6 or 7. Amazon was not profitable for the first 17 years of operation. So our students have to go through the case study and identify the 3 major issues. 34 students, 32 of them failed to mention the absence of profit as a major issue. So I had a very brave student stand up, and speaking on behalf of the class, I had to write down the quote. Professor McNeeley, in all due respect, I believe your generation was more consumed with profitability than ours. Now, I thought of jumping over the podium and hitting them, but that's probably the last day of my academic career and not the professional way to address it. But I suggested that she not bring that up in any job interview. Now, no, this is a graduate student in the capstone class from one of the most elite universities in the world. Last week in your hometown, Ruth, Crane Chicago Business, cover story, Capitalism 2.0. Socially conscious investing gains currency as investors seek to improve sustainability and benefit the social good while still making money. Now they're saying we have burdens that we're putting upon your PVF guys above and beyond earning profit, creating jobs, reinvesting. It's a very slippery slope.
Wow, that was one heck of a statement that your student made, and I can definitely understand the quote that you put up here. I want to dive into what we're just talking about, Don, in spotlighting talent. And within this industry, as we always say, it's not the sexiest industry in the world, but it is an industry that's vital to our basic needs. The PVF Roundtable is focused on raising funds for education in the trade schools and has done an amazing job. I believe at the end of 2019 or 2020, they'd raised over $1 million to donate to schools as well as universities to attract talent to the industry. Now, I would be remiss without talking to you, Professor Don McNeeley. Let's talk about talent and spotlighting this industry.
So, the interesting thing is about 10 years ago, there was a concern because the narrative on college campuses was we're going to transition from a manufacturing economy to a service economy. And the rhetoric was really negative, and that influenced students' career choices. Starting about 5 years ago, it was even worse. They weren't talking negatively about manufacturing. They just weren't talking about manufacturing. It's as if we just vaporized. Look at this from USA Today. If you ever look in the lower left hand, they always have some recent graph, and this is about only 14 months old. Only 3% of middle school and high school students express interest in skilled trades, a field experiencing labor shortages. The interesting thing that I see happening is I think, parents used to compete over who had the bigger car, who had the most bedrooms in the house, what's the square footage of your house. And we start to go through these different iterations of how we compete. And I think what's happened over the last 10 years is, no parent wants to live with the shame of their kid not being college material. And I think that's absolutely ridiculous, because if you want to have some security that you will always be able to put food on your table, really follow the trades. And back when I was in high school on the south side of Chicago, you had the Washburn Trade School. You want to be a drywaller or electrician. I think one of the most under-realized assets we have in our nation is community colleges. I think they should all transition over to skill training. You know, there's an old joke, Ruth, where a lawyer came home from work and the plumber is just wrapping up under the sink, and he hands the lawyer the bill and he says, it's $400. And the lawyer said, $400? I'm a lawyer and I don't even make $400. The plumber said, I know, I used to be a lawyer. So the reality is the supply of attorneys exceeds the demand, but the skilled trades, there is absolutely a shortage. So I'll tell you, it's really left for a more in-depth drill down. I hope you and I can do that in the university environment this fall. But, you know, when you go to war, it needs to be with a worthy adversary. And if you look at the skill shortage in our industry, I mean, we have jobs open that pay 70 to 90,000. We just can't fill it. Part of it is the stimulus package, but that stimulus package is temporary, Ruth. But our industry image is suffering. We don't do God's work, perhaps, but what we do is far more important than most people realize it. So who formulates our industry image and the court of public opinion? And it's three constituencies. It's the media, it's the politician, and it's the university. And we all need to get out there, get on those agendas, get on those dockets, and start to get the word out.
You're right, Don. You are 1,000% correct. There is so much going on within the PVF industry, and it is a vital industry. And, you know, going through, and I hate saying the COVID word, but after going through last year, we see the importance of it, and even more so now with the need to bring in new talent. From what I'm hearing from our conversation here is there are brighter skies ahead, and there is a silver lining that's going to come out of this. It's just going to take some time to continue to work through. I want to ask you one quick question here. You know, we talked a lot. We talked politics. We talked the economy. We talked about talent. But what do you think is the largest issue right now that's facing the PVF industry? There was one thing. What's the largest?
Well, I think we just discussed it. I think it's talent. You know, they talk about the shortage of skills. And, you know, I really have a passion for that, a frustration with that. You know, I've got 6 grandkids. They're all very young, but if every one of them pursued the trades as opposed to college, you know, I've got 529s that I've funded them with. They want to use that for a trade. I have no problem whatsoever. You know, at the high school level, you're assigned to your counselor by the alphabet. There's no interest match. There's no skill match. But I don't toss and turn at night because of the skill shortage for 2 reasons. One, I can automate. If I can't find welders, I'll bring robotic welding in. You can automate various jobs. The second thing is I have complete confidence in the law of supply and demand. If we have an abundance of attorneys and a shortage of welders, eventually people will stop going to law school and start going to welding school. The biggest challenge I think we have in all other industries, leadership. If this COVID journey has taught us anything, we have absolutely washed out fake leadership, feigned leadership. Leadership is absolutely in dire shortage. Look at it in the political agenda, the governmental agenda, in our own industry. We don't have enough industry leaders who are legitimate, if you will. You know, think back to we dinosaurs that were born in the 50s and 60s. You know, we didn't get carted around to organize sports. You got on your bike and you finished delivering your papers on this thing called paper route. And then you put your ball glove on it and you went to Frankie's house and you went to Jimmy's house and the 3 of you went to Mark's house. And when you got enough, you showed up at the sandlot and you coordinated the ball game. Those were organizational skills. Those were leadership skills. The structure of our society is not developing future leaders unless they're coming out of the military. So I think, Ruth, that the biggest fear, what keeps me up at night, where's future leadership coming from? Because a lot of us are boomers. We have more years behind us than we have in front of us. And frankly, Ruth, we're not leaving them our job. We're not leaving them our career. We're basically leaving them with the stewardship of our life's work. And if we don't have proper leadership, then our life's work may be for naught. So that's my concern.
Very well put, Don. Absolutely very well put. Leadership is needed now and is pushing us forward. And You're right. And hopefully we know we're going to see sunnier skies ahead by those leaders guiding us and the new talent coming in. You know, I'd be remiss if I didn't flash back to when I was in college and I was listening to a presentation from a speaker or my professor who is an expert on the topic, and they always left us with a closing thought. So, Dr. Don McNeeley, what's your closing thought?
Yeah, I guess I want to talk to my colleagues in the PVF industry. I've enjoyed talking to you, but let me send a message to them at this stage in my career. You know, I think we all want to live, Ruth, a relevant life, but you spend so much of your life at work. To achieve a relevant life, you need to be in a relevant industry. You're going to spend an awful lot of your life at work. And I want you to understand that earlier I said we may not do God's work, but what we do is more important than most realize. You know, without the PVF industry, let's take a snapshot of life. You know, we don't heat or cool homes. We don't have fresh water to drink. We don't have the infrastructure to travel by. We don't have a military to defend our borders with. Just think for a minute. We don't enjoy one of the lowest infant mortality rates in the world without our industry. We don't enjoy one of the world's longest life expectancies. Therefore, I encourage all of you in my closing thought in the PVF industry, ignore the BS that continues to grow from the media, where the chorus of denunciation of capitalism, that we are dead, that we are obsolete, or at the very best, we're out of favor. I encourage you to continue creating the employment that you create, the high-paying jobs, continue providing healthcare and educational support for your employees as you're doing, continue to be reinvesting in your business and taking the risk that you do with your profit, and continue your generosity in supporting billions of dollars of charity. And in the end, rise above that din and know you're all indeed relevant if you're in our industry.
Those are beautiful words, Dr. Don McNeeley, and spot on and very well put. And I'm going to close out this presentation by saying, you know, being a vital industry, the only way that we can truly survive too is relying upon our peers and networking, and leaning on one another in good times and in bad times. And the PVF Roundtable is definitely a forum and a group that provides that opportunity. There are many upcoming PVF Roundtable events that are taking place this year as the COVID restrictions are easing up. And as folks feel comfortable and the vaccine rolls out, I encourage everyone to go to the PVF Roundtable's website for additional information on what is going on, as well as signing up for what we have planned for this year. McNeeley, it is always a pleasure, and it's always an educational opportunity, and I appreciate that, as well as our industry members as well. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you down the line.
Thanks, Ruth.